When you say the word Gray Jedi, people start breaking out their keyboards for 1,000-word essays, but today we're talking about a very different kind of Gray Jedi, put the keyboard away, which existed in the expanded universe. These were the Gray Paladins. They're ultimately a fairly minor and relatively underexplored group, but what is there is a pretty interesting example of RPG origins, Ascended fanon, and Jedi backstory all rolled into one. The Gray Paladins were an offshoot of the Jedi Order, but more specifically, they were an offshoot of the Jedi Order, having their roots in a second group called the Teepo Paladins. We'll start by just giving the official information we have on both of these groups. The Teepo Paladins originated at an unclear point in galactic history. The Essential Guide to Warfare mentions them alongside the Corellian Jedi as being revived in the period of the New Republic, but still maintaining a kind of distinct identity within Luke's order based on their ancient roots, tied to the Jedi Lords from 1,000+ years before the Empire, whom I've talked about in another video. But while this may kind of point towards them being around 1,000 years old, the Corellian Jedi were around long before that. They're in the Old Republic MMO as well, so it doesn't actually narrow things down all that much. The rest of the official information about both groups tends to come from the Coruscant Nights trilogy, as well as The Last Jedi as in the Legends novel, not Episode 8. Whatever the specific timeline was, the Teepo Paladins were formed by a Jedi Master named Teepo, who pushed for the Jedi to train with blasters as opposed to just boring old lightsabers. This bit of heterodoxy was seen as extremist by the more orthodox members of the Jedi Order at best, and at worst the Teepo Paladins were believed to be under the sway of the dark side. Coruscant Nights said the Teepo Paladins were censured, but it doesn't exactly specify what the censuring was. We know they and the Gray Paladins maintained some connection to the Jedi Order, at least later on, so it's possible they started out being entirely outcast at some point and then let back in with fewer privileges, or it's possible they were kept on the fringes of the Order the entire time. We don't really know. The Gray Paladins then began to emerge within the Teepos as an even more hardline group. They entirely rejected lightsabers, instead deciding to specialize in some other kind of weapon. The specific weapon was up to the individual member. It could be blasters, or it could just be your fists, whatever you really wanted to specialize in. Although it still pretty strictly couldn't be a lightsaber. Additionally, they felt that Jedi, Orthodox, and Teepo alike relied too much on the Force in everyday life. Quote, they acknowledged that a Jedi could no more be independent of the Force than of nourishment or air. Nevertheless, they had developed skills and techniques that did not utilize its flashier aspects. Some of the Teepos started to wear blindfold as a way to kind of enhance their connection to the Force, but the Greys tended to shy away from even that. They preferred to like this video and subscribe for more. This idea actually fits in with something we see later on in the timeline in the Hand of Thrawn duology. Han, Mara, and others around Luke started believing he was relying too much on using the Force, and that he was at risk of falling to the dark side because of its overuse. Concern with Jedi overuse of the Force more generally is something similarly expressed in the Black Fleet crisis among the Fallen Asi, yet another set of Force users, though they would also object to the overly militant focus of the Gray Paladins. It is also kind of ironic that the Grey Jedi concept, which people tend to know more about, is the one that's focused on using a wider array of Force superpowers because they use the light and the dark side, while the Grey Paladins are essentially the opposite. They don't want to use any Force powers at all. But anyways, the Gray Paladins end up being able to do some pretty impressive things with their weapon of choice. The main Gray Paladin we end up seeing in any story, or actually the only one, is Larenth Tarek, a dual blaster wielder who's able to shoot other projectiles out of the air, the way a lightsaber wielder would typically deflect them. This includes not just other physical projectiles, but also particle beams, which is one subcategory of how the books refer to certain laser projectiles. It's a little bit messy as far as that goes. Coruscant Nights, set shortly after Order 66, also says that only a few dozen remained alive at that point, so it was seemingly not that small of a group to begin with, since this is a few dozen survivors. One of the characters in the book does also note that their militant lifestyle and training would probably make them pretty well suited among the Jedi for the new life they found themselves in under the Empire. And as the Essential Guide to Warfare notes, some of them did make it through the post-Endor period. But where the Teepo Paladins got particularly interesting is that they're an example of Ascended fanon. They originally came from a fan creation, not from an official work. They were originally made by Peter Skanes as an RPG homebrew for blaster-wielding Jedi, and then they were included in something called the Jedi Handbook, a fan-made RPG supplement which compiled a bunch of these kinds of things. This section called them Quick Draw Jedi and gave a few extra bits of information which are of course not themselves canon, but can help explain a bit of where they came from and how they work, filling in some of the gaps we had from before. First off, it does call the Teepo fairly new in the long history of the Jedi tradition. This could be seen to conflict with the idea that they went back 1,000 or more years, but in a 20,000 year history, only a millennium could be said to be fairly recent, from a certain point of view. It does more specifically say, though, that they formed when blasters became the common sidearm of the galaxy, but blasters are always around in Star Wars history as we know it long before the Jedi, so it doesn't really make sense in this context. Beyond that, it established the original Master Teepo as a Twi'lek with the first name Nars, and it says he was fully shunned from the Order for his suspected dark side corruption. This is also what inspired the use of the name Paladin instead of Knights, since Teepo was kind of bitter about being kicked out, something which also influenced him completely forbidding the use of lightsabers. The canon version of the Teepo Paladins didn't fully forbid the lightsabers, that was just the Gray Paladins. I'll be honest, the actual writing behind the Teepo here is not professional, clearly, but they were never intended to be official, and they were just made to have fun with as an RPG homebrew, so they really shouldn't be judged by that standard. I'm only bringing it up because it does impact how much you might want to headcanon all of the elements of this into the kind of backstory for the Teepo. I'm honestly not sure how Michael Reeves, author of Coruscant Nights and many other Star Wars books, came to include it in his stories, and unfortunately he died in 2023, so unless there's an interview out there that I haven't seen, please let me know if that does exist. That will likely remain a mystery. Again, these are a fairly minor part of the lore, but I think it's also an example of a lot of cool stuff. RPG sourcebooks are often pulled from for background information in books, and here we have not just an RPG supplement, but a fan-made RPG supplement being used. It's also something that's a fairly obscure part of the lore, despite technically being included in a whole trilogy plus another standalone novel. It is almost certainly not what anyone thinks about when someone says Gray Jedi. Either way, that's going to do it for today. I originally thought this was just going to be enough for a YouTube short, but the more I looked into it, the more I just kind of wanted to talk more about it. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Please do consider subscribing if you have enjoyed the videos. We're very close to 80,000 subscribers, and then someday, maybe 100,000. I have a hole in my wall that I'd love to cover with the plaque, so if you want to help me get there, that'd be appreciated. Also, let me know in the comments if there's another topic you'd like to see me cover on the channel.